this morning, we are going to try to figure out AI's impact on how we work and our workplaces and the structure of our organizations and all the broader implications. Unfortunately, I don't really know what's going to happen, but what I am going to try to do is put what's currently happening into kind of a broader historical process so we can see where we came from. It'll make it a little easier to see where we're going, but also to even understand where we are now, which I think some of us are still struggling with. So to warm us up, I'll start with a little question. If you've seen one of my talks in the last few weeks, don't tell them the real answer, but give it your try. So about a decade ago, this works good, a big Hollywood studio decided to produce a superhero film with a woman. They found a lady named Gal Gadot, poured $100 million into the budget, spent a few tens more on marketing, tapped into an existing franchise, Wonder Woman, etc., and made $1 billion or more in revenue. A few years before that, another big Hollywood studio had kind of a similar idea, brought an even bigger star, Halle Berry, poured the same amount of money or more, same playbook, Catwoman, absolute flop, didn't even return the investment on it. Now, the hardest question that you're going to face today, and possibly for the rest of the year, is why did Wonder Woman succeed and Catwoman fail? Who can tell me why? Don't be shy. We gave you wine, we fed you, now you need to show up. So, any thoughts? Marketing? 1 second. So marketing, okay, they both ran the same playbook, same budget. Wonder Woman was first? No, it was actually second. Something more detailed. Tell me what you think. Okay, story, what's the difference in the stories? Okay, probably both of them are not really good, so I doubt. But okay, give me 3 more and we'll move on.
Vicious propaganda against cats.
More reasonable than the other options. Netflix didn't really make a difference on this one in particular, but good thinking. That is something that changed over time. Graphics, they were both state of the art for their moment in time. Timing, but what does timing mean? What one was on Tuesday, the other on Wednesday? What's the probably, but again, Catwoman was competing with other films in the same environment. Maybe. Marvel, also, they're both parts of large franchises. Okay, I mean, great ideas, by the way, amazing. Usually I only get a few, you guys. The wine does work. Okay, you can come out of the cave again today. So, I'll tell you the answer. Are you ready? Nobody knows. So, the foundational rule of Hollywood and of show business more broadly, as William Goldman, the screenwriter of The Princess Bride and All the President's Men famously said, is that nobody knows anything. What you put into a film or a creative work tells you very little about what's going to come out of it. In fancy words, economists call this a nonlinear process. So there's an unpredictable, disproportionate, and unstable relationship between what goes in and what comes out. Now, this happens because show business essentially produces intangible things, intangible assets like ideas, stories, designs, images, memories, feelings, relationships between people that have something common to get excited about, and in legal terms, intellectual property, and in accounting terms, intangible assets. Now, these intangible assets are produced in a way that is very different from tangible physical things that we see around us. The production of intangible assets is completely scalable. So one person can come up with one idea. That idea could be worth billions, even if that person only thought about it for 2 minutes in the shower. And of course, in the other direction, 500 people can work on something for 3 years, and it will be completely worthless. You cannot sell it for parts. You cannot discount it and make people excited about it. No one wants to listen to your song, even if you give it away for free, unless they want to listen to your song. Intangible production also tends to be enmeshed in network effect. So the value of a film is not just what we think about it, but what we think our friends will think about it and whether other people watched it. And of course, the value of a software product is about who else is using it and what types of standards does it have that are compatible with other things that other people are doing. So the value depends on the behavior of multiple people. And it also tends to have social cascades. So suddenly kind of goes viral and people get excited about it. It's super valuable, or it doesn't, and it's hard to understand why. It's made, or they're made, of unquantifiable ingredients. So again, the difference between Catwoman or Wonder Woman, if you just divide it into something that you can measure, it's very hard to understand what's the difference between them. The difference between Brad Pitt and, I don't know, some other guy in a truck out there, hard to explain. They both kind of follow the same specifications, but there is a difference between them. And likewise, the difference between Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk or some programmer that also went to Harvard but earns 30 times more than the same guy who sat next to him, very hard to quantify, and sometimes impossible to quantify because there is no difference. So there's a lot of randomness in the process of value creation in the world of intangible assets, partly because there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of competition, a lot of people. Anyone can come up with an idea, anyone can sing a song, and as we'll see later, anyone can create all sorts of other things these days as well. So beyond my fancy speak, our parents understood all of this in their guts. So when I was a kid and I told my mom that I want to be Axl Rose when I grow up, she told me that I should be Dr. Poleg when I grow up. And the experts agreed with my mother. So when I read The Black Swan, the book about uncertainty, when it came out about 17 years ago, Nassim Nicholas Taleb told me and all the readers basically that you should pick what he calls a non-scalable profession, a profession that is limited by geography, works by the hour, comes to the office, shows up, you get paid for what you do, and you're probably not going to be a billionaire, but you're also going to make a nice living, unlike in other professions where, nobody knows anything. So essentially, growing up, we had a choice whether we want to go to the more linear path, predictable path, or to the nonlinear one. But today, we have to ask ourselves whether this choice is still available. So let's look at the world from above. 50 years ago, if you look at the S&P 500, the value of the 500 more or less largest companies in the world, about 80%, more than 80% of that value was tied directly to physical things, to tangible assets, so to real estate, machines, inventory, raw materials. Basically, the valuation of the companies and the physical stuff that they had corresponded almost perfectly. Today, 50 years later, the story flipped on its head. So today, about 90% of the value of the S&P 500 is made of intangible things. Both intangible in strict accounting terms, so intellectual property, code, content, stories, relationships, know-how, but also stuff that we cannot describe, like feelings, hype, why one company's revenue or assets are multiplied 50% when it's valued, and another is only multiplied 5 times. Nobody knows. But our economy itself has already completely flipped on its head. Now, part of this story is the rise of tech and finance and businesses that don't really make anything physical. So in 1990, the largest 10 companies in the world mostly made hard physical things, whether it's barrels of oil or even computers, Walmart, Coca-Cola cans, washing machines. And today, all of these companies produce nothing. So from tech companies to financial ownership firms produce nothing, not in a derogatory sense, but they don't sell physical products per se, apart from maybe Tesla and Apple, which do, but again, their valuation has nothing to do with the value of the physical assets that they have in their books. But an even bigger part of the story is that intangible things like software and stories and code and relationships, determine both the value and utility of even the most physical assets that we have. From our automobiles to washing machines to drone swarms, all of these things are no longer just like, a car with a little screen that plays music. In a Tesla, the steering wheel is not connected to the wheel. So without software, there's no relationship between the two. My washing machine, at least that's what LG says, cannot figure out how much water it needs without going through a machine learning algorithm. And it has AI written on it, which is so cool. And I'm so excited about it. And the drone swarms that we see now over Ukraine and also, unfortunately, over Europe and even in the US, the drones themselves are quite simple, but the way they're networked together and the way they fly together and moves, that's what makes them valuable and lethal or useful. Even in real estate, there was once a guy who said that physical assets don't matter and that things like energy and spirituality are much more important. But beyond Adam Newman, there are also profitable real estate companies that have more intangible assets on their balance sheets than tangible assets. So Marriott, most of their value is tied to their intellectual property, their know-how, and all sorts of other things that have nothing to do with the buildings. And again, the same building under a Marriott flag or under a nobody flag is worth completely differently just because of those intangibles that you put on top of it. So essentially, the more intangibles we have across the economy, the more important they become everywhere else, the more these nonlinear dynamics, this unpredictability, disconnect between what goes in and what comes out, and instability kind of permeates everything else we do. And we're seeing the signs everywhere. So inequality in different professions, and I'm not talking just about tech, has exploded over the last 30, 40 years. A lawyer at the 10th percentile used to make about 2.5 less than a lawyer at the 90th percentile. Today, the 90th percentile guy or lady make about 14 times more than someone at the 10th percentile. Likewise, for doctors, for medicine, for consulting, for a lot of other professions. And as we'll see later, this is getting worse. Random social moments on social media and on social networks determine the value of even the simplest, most low-tech products in the world, whether it is ocean spray juices, which suddenly fly off the shelf because some guy in Idaho posted a video of him on the way to work after his truck broke down, or cosmetics, because Kylie decided that that's what she wants to put on her face, or burgers, because Mr. Beast decided that he wants to start selling burgers and partnered with a bunch of cloud kitchens to launch more than 100 restaurants across the country in a few weeks. So again, these crazy dynamics are now coming into our physical world. Meanwhile, companies, just like those in show business in the past, are producing much more revenue with fewer employees. So Ford Motors, adjusted for inflation, made about $500,000 in its heyday, in the 60s, when it was the kind of the epitome of American production. Today, Netflix makes about $2.5 million per employee in revenue, and there's even more extreme examples of that. So OnlyFans generates more than $30 million per employee. It makes about, I think, almost $5 billion a year, and it has 46 employees that are sitting in a co-working space in London. So just to understand the type of scale that we're dealing with today. Now, the best companies are already showing a preference to hire from anywhere, to find that superstar wherever they are. And not just in tech, again, even in law, even in medicine, of course, even in consulting and elsewhere. And generally, flexibility is becoming or has become the norm rather than the exception. We're still fighting about return to office or not return to office, but we're working much less rigidly than we did before COVID, and let alone 50 years ago. So we can say in simple terms that if in the past there was no business like show business, today essentially all business is gradually becoming similar to show business. And AI will intensify all of these dynamics. So it would allow more people in more professions to be scalable in various ways, to build things, to make more of their time, to package their expertise and productize it in various ways, just like recording artists used to do. It brings those network effects into more things, both because it gives you more reason to tie the internet into your product, and for other reasons. it makes those unquantifiable ingredients more important in more industries because we're all competing on things that are harder to explain. Like, again, if you want a washing machine today, the basic features and capabilities have been set in stone for like 30 years. No one's invented anything new that a washing machine does. So your buying decisions are governed by all sorts of things that are much harder to explain and measure. And again, it brings randomness into that process because it empowers more people to do more stuff and compete with you and to experiment in a variety of ways. So what does this look like in practice? To get a glimpse into the future, both good and bad, we only need to look down towards San Francisco and see what's going on over there. So less than 3 years ago, a company called OpenAI launched a product called ChatGPT. It was essentially a classic nonlinear success story. So a nonprofit with a small team, limited budget, launched an academic article about some product called ChatGPT and invited people to play with it. And within 2 months, 100 million users. Now, 2.5 years later, 700 million weekly users. The company is valued at $500 billion in the last round, and obviously become a household name, cultural phenomenon, geopolitical event, affecting the energy grid, affecting the relationship with China, chip bans, everything else, just out of this little thing that has, in the past, Ford Motors could not like quietly launch a car and reach 700 million or 100 million people quickly. As a trivia, if anyone here knows, how long did it take Ford to sell 100 million cars since the invention of the Model T? Take a guess. Ballpark, 60 years? Yeah, 63 years. So it took a while. Today, someone comes up with something, 2 months later, can reach the whole world. Now, the technology behind ChatGPT is also nonlinear at its heart. So the software, large language models, don't behave like traditional software. They don't follow a sequential logic where you define something and they do what you told them. They're completely probabilistic. They make guesses about what you want to hear. And every time you ask them something, they're going to give you a different answer because they basically only guess the next token, the next part of a word. Somehow this process produces results that in many fields are better than what traditional process or humans could do. And the hardware of it is also nonlinear in the sense that unlike traditional chips, CPUs, it doesn't follow a sequential logic and calculate things one by one, but it does all sorts of fuzzy things in parallel, and again, somehow coalesces into answers that are not always the same, even if you ask the same question. But again, in many, many processes, it seems to be more useful, provides better answers, partly because the world itself is nonlinear and fuzzy, and somehow these kind of less rigid approaches have higher success rates. Now, it also has a nonlinear effect on the economy itself. So if we see what's happening in the world at the moment, we're in the midst of a bigger tech boom already than the dot-com boom. NASDAQ at all-time high, valuations at all-time high, but also revenue is at all-time high. So it's not just value and hype, it's actually companies making money and generating revenue and profits. But at the same time, employment is down, occupancy in offices is down, which is something that never happened before in history. These two things, like we have worse occupancy in San Francisco now than during the dot-com bust or during the great financial crisis, even though we're in the middle of a bigger boom than the dot-com. And of course, the specialized talent trade is going completely off the rails. We have people getting 100 million or 250 million pay packages to sign at different companies, not to become the CEOs of these companies, just to come and work in a department. And we have founders raising $1 billion, $2 billion seed rounds for companies that have no products, no employees, and no revenue, of course. So again, these crazy dynamics basically make Hollywood look pretty quaint in comparison. Meanwhile, people don't want to invest in the type of places where humans work. So for the first time in history, we're about to see investment in data centers overtake investment in new offices. A really beautiful chart. Again, this is just investment in new offices, so it doesn't mean that all the other offices disappeared, but it tells you something about where we are. And even those amazing models like ChatGPT that change the world and have these incredible valuations are more similar to a movie than to a Model T. So when ChatGPT launched, it was based on GPT-3 or 3.5. Within a few weeks, multiple other companies could do more or less the same thing, and multiple open source models could do the same thing completely for free. So once you launch the thing, people can copy it, the value declines quickly, attention goes away quickly. And as Satya Nadella said, the models themselves have become more of a commodity. So it's more about, again, the relationships you have with the people, the brand you put on top of it. OpenAI's biggest asset is ChatGPT.com, the brand itself, the fact that they're sitting in people's heads. But in terms of capabilities, they're no longer ahead of anyone. And today, with AI, a single person can do what Instagram or Vine enabled people to do in entertainment 10 years ago. So anyone with an idea can just write a prompt and then build an app that does something, or develop plans for something physical that then could be produced relatively easily. So again, all of that noise that brings nonlinear dynamics into the world of showbiz and content is now coming into the world of software and everything that depends on software, which is most of our economy. So essentially, when we look at the kind of current impact of AI, there's a tiny part of the story which is really about AI replacing people's jobs and taking them away. It's both not happening to a huge extent yet, and also it's very hard to measure because there's so many other things wrong with our economy and so much other disturbance that it's hard to decide what goes where. We have tariffs and general uncertainty and other things. Uh, AI is rerouting capital to hardware, those data centers, those chips that companies basically fire people in order to be able to invest in those type of things, not because those people are being replaced by AI directly, but because the company would rather bet on AI and invest in the long term for that rather than just hire or keep those people employed. And generally, AI is heightening uncertainty that hinders hiring and leasing more broadly. When you look at the world today, nobody wants to sign, almost nobody wants to sign, even a 5-year lease or 10-year lease, because it's really hard to understand what are going to be your headcount requirements or what your people are going to do or not. And essentially, it's making all business unpredictable, unequal, and unstable. So more broadly, we're starting to see clearly, and particularly in San Francisco, but basically in every city on earth as well, that there's a mismatch between our economy and the way it already is, the way it flipped on its head, and the world we built around it, both the physical world and also the organizational structures and even our assumptions and our mindset as we come to work or as we think about productivity. So our world was based on linear assumptions. We assumed that production is predictable, that you're going to take some materials, put them through a process, and you know what's going to come out on the other side. We assume that value is scheduled and cumulative. That again, I'm going to show up tomorrow, do what I did yesterday, and the same type of value is going to come out, and then I'll have more stuff in my inventory. We assume that profits are constrained, that again, even if I'm Henry Ford and I invent the next Model T, it's going to take me 63 years to reach the rest of the world. And likewise for my competitors, so no one is going to show up out of somewhere and kind of take over the world. That's how we feel in our guts. We assume that the world needs a mass of kind of standardized people and tasks. This is what our workplaces are designed to accommodate, what our cities are designed to accommodate in terms of the schedules. We assume that there'll be a normal distribution of rewards, that most people will be more or less the same in terms of their income and also in terms of the education that they need and in terms of their spending. And the change, when it comes, will be gradual and slow, and that success is repeatable, that once we figure out what to do, our career path or our daily work, we're just going to keep doing the same thing until we retire, and then everything is going to be okay. But our economy is already nonlinear. It operates based on completely different rules. So production in more and more fields is unpredictable. Value is sudden, and when it comes, it can compound very, very quickly. Profits are scalable. Specialized individuals are tied to unique tasks rather than masses of people doing the same thing and creating value that way. And again, we're seeing that in extremis in big tech, where people are getting $250 million as a salary, not even for inventing anything new. There's a tendency towards winner-take-most income distribution. Change is rapid, and failure is frequent. Most of the stuff that is being tried doesn't work, and that's okay. Now, how do we handle all this uncertainty? both as organizations and as people. So organizations can learn from Hollywood. We started with showbiz, and we'll stay with that. So to start with, we need more, or we'll see more, and we are seeing more organizations adopting all sorts of more flexible and amorphous structures. So just like at the end of a film, you see these credits with 500 different people that do all these obscure and weird things and have these strange titles, and most of them don't work for the same company. They work for different companies, work for themselves. Some of them work for companies with hundreds of employees, some of them with 5 employees, some of them are alone, and they all come together to work on a project, not just for a week, sometimes even for 5 years, sometimes projects that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but it's not a traditional, typical employment structure. We're seeing, and we're going to see more companies fund bets rather than ongoing operations. So think of things that we do as things that will probably fail, but that if they succeed, have to justify and pay for all of the other failures, which again, in showbiz and creative industries, the parallel distribution of rewards is very standard, and it's coming to more and more industries. We're going to see more companies paying exorbitant amounts to superstars, to anyone that they think could thread the needle or de-risk this process in one way or another. And just like in Hollywood, we'll see the superstars curse, which means that if you pay someone the value of what they're worth, you're going to lose money anyway. Because if Gal Gadot can get you $1 billion in revenue, you're going to have to pay her $300 million next time and spend $200 million on marketing. And then with the production costs, it would mean that you're still probably going to lose money even if your movie does okay, because that's what happens in Hollywood. We're going to see more companies hire from anywhere, as Hollywood does. Margot Robbie is from Australia. Ryan Gosling is from Canada. When someone went to produce Barbie, they didn't just look around, who happens to live near the office and the studio and wants to come into work today. They went and looked for the right person all over the world that can make a difference for their film. We'll see companies constantly relocating more aggressively for tax or regulatory reasons, as is common in showbiz. We'll see higher reliance on modular, or you can call them flexible, real estate assets. So in Hollywood, it's those big stages that every day could be modified to look like a completely different place, have a different layout, serve a different purpose, and then the next day they become something else. Or on the other extreme, on highly specialized integrated assets that have unique equipment, that have stuff that you need and you can only use in those type of equipment, in those type of spaces, and is not worthwhile for you as a company to just own on your own. We'll see companies, like in Hollywood, avoiding physical space altogether when possible for their employees, or replacing their employees altogether with AI where they can. I'm not saying that it's happening immediately. And maybe the most interesting one, and that's the evolution of showbiz as well, starting to design systems that enable the emergence of ideas rather than following prescriptions or edicts. So what TikTok does and how TikTok wins in the entertainment world is not by figuring out, deciding what people want to watch and let's produce more of that like Hollywood producers used to do, but to build a system that enables rapid experimentation, enables anyone to throw spaghetti on the wall and then amplify very quickly whatever seems to work, and then that usually decays in value quickly as well. So kind of throw it away as soon as you have to and bringing in the next thing. Now, to close out, we also have to think about ourselves, not just about our companies and cities. And I started with a story about my mother, and I still want to become Axl Rose, and I think it's a possibility for me now with AI. I got the looks, I just have to figure out the music. We'll see you in 2 years, you'll see. But essentially, most of what our parents told us is no longer correct, is no longer good advice. It was kind of made for a linear world that increasingly is less relevant for our children. So today, when I think about what I want to tell or what I am telling my kids, you can almost draw a comparison between what my parents told me and what we should say today. So if in the past, you had to wait for permission and kind of get your qualifications and get your diploma and get someone to tell you that you're allowed to try to do the thing that you want to do, today you can just do it. In the past, you had to live within your means, which is generally good advice. Today, I think you should actually live below your means, but leave some slack for asymmetrical bets to invest in things that can grow up in value crazily, whether it's AI or Bitcoin or whatever you're into or your hobby, but something that actually gives you a chance to break away from the treadmill. And again, I'm not saying YOLO, go crazy, the opposite. Be conservative in the things that you can afford to be conservative about so that you can take those bets, because the straight path is not going to get you where you want to go. If we all just show up every day and go to the office and, invest in the S&P 500, probably we're not going to afford the same things that our parents could afford by the time they were 60 or 70. So we have to take a little more risk, but we have to hedge it with conservatism on the other side. In the past, aim for the center, right? Do what everybody else is doing. Be a doctor, be an accountant, go to the same school, follow the same script. Today, aim for the extremes. Try to find an angle. And this is true for companies too, but we are talking about people. In the past, act on solid information. Don't do anything until you figured it out and you know exactly what's going on. Today, assume that there is no information that will ever be perfect for you. You cannot know what you need to know. So what matters more is the odds. If it's worth the risk, do it. Likewise, once you fail, don't necessarily learn from your mistakes. If the odds are still the same, maybe it's worth doing the same thing again. Upload another video, launch another startup, try another project, do another initiative. If it justifies the odds and they haven't changed, do it again. Obviously, if you learn something in the process, great, but assume that maybe there's nothing to learn. Sometimes really just doing the same thing again can produce 100 times more value in this type of economic environment. Don't waste your time. Sentence I heard often as a kid. Actually, we should waste more of our time, because by following the old processes, most of us are already wasting a lot of our time. So we actually should embrace more unstructured exploration. In the past, be the best. Still a good job if you can get it, but in more and more fields, it's hard to understand what the best means. Value today is created by matching yourself to whoever on earth wants to pay the most for your services at any given moment. Even those AI researchers that are getting $250 million pay packages at Meta now, 3 years ago were completely irrelevant, following some really exotic track in machine learning that the world wasn't interested in. And maybe in 2 years, they will be irrelevant again. I don't think they'll go hungry, but they got to where they are not by doing exactly the same things that everybody else was doing. They got there by specializing and kind of crossing a few different interests in some exotic way. And somehow they won that lottery by matching with this time and with their employer. Invest in your career. Again, there's no less and less that thing career means what it used to. And it's more important to invest both in assets, in things that appreciate in value regardless of your career, but also in things that are timeless, like relationships or different types of skills that stay with you and that are portable. And finally, listen to your parents or boss. They're still very important in your life, but it's less about listening to them and more about drawing courage from the faith that they have in you, to the extent that they do. And that's also true as a parent and also as a boss. You have to give your employees the feeling that you trust them, that you have faith in them, and encourage them to be courageous. And I think ultimately that's what's going to help each of us thrive, I hope, as individuals, but also as organizations. Thank you for your time.